Wonderful. Thank you very much, Karen, for that. I am Maria Toglia, and I am the Director of Capacity Building for the Pennsylvania branch of the International Dyslexia Association. And I'm very happy to be here with my colleagues, Nancy Scharf, Kathleen Biddle, and Aileen Hauer, to talk about the work that we've been doing here in Pennsylvania to build capacity for teacher preparation in structured literacy. So you're going to hear from each one of us. We're going to start off with Nancy Scharf, who is going to talk to you about the work that we've been doing with the Read by Fourth campaign in Philadelphia. So take it away, Nancy.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you all for being here. Actually, Again, I'm Nancy Scharf, and I'm the literacy consultant to Philadelphia's Read by Fourth campaign. And I think what you're going to hear is that some of the work that we're going to discuss today actually has its roots in Read by Fourth. So by background, Read by Fourth is a campaign organized around something called collective impact. That is, Read by Fourth brings together nonprofits, the School District of Philadelphia, charter schools, parochial schools, foundations, universities, parent groups, to work together, to work collectively, to make sure that our children can read by the time they get to fourth grade. And we're clear that we can do more for our students in Philadelphia by working together and strategically rather than in silos. And this is the theme you're going to hear throughout this entire session. So on this slide, a little more background on Read by Fourth. It was started in 2014, and it's part of a much larger national effort, the Grade Level Reading Campaign, which supports a whole nationwide network of local and regional campaigns similar to ours. So there's now more than 350 in 46 states, very similar to Read by Fourth. So what's interesting is that at its inception, the Grade Level Reading Campaign said there are 3 areas in order for you to be a member of the Grade Level Reading Campaign, 3 areas you have to focus on. And these areas are, number 1, school readiness, number 2, summer and after school, and 3rd, attendance. So the big aha in Philadelphia was that this approach implies the children will learn to read, that the magic will happen if they just attend school and are engaged during out of school time. But what we saw is the need to focus on classroom instruction. In Philadelphia, we then began our work in 2014 with an additional focus, teacher preparation and support, recognizing that teachers need to be knowledgeable and skilled in evidence-based approaches to teaching reading, to the science of reading or structured literacy to be effective. So the teacher preparation and support group has been co-led with PBIDA for the last 10 years. And we brought together all the partners I mentioned, but especially the universities, to work together to make sure classroom instruction is effective for our children. So if we go to the next slide, here is a very quick summary of our strategy. So the working group is focused on 3 areas. Making sure we have knowledgeable, aspiring teachers, making sure we're equipping the next generation of educators with the right skills before they enter the classroom. Second is making sure we have supported in-service educators, that we are deepening their knowledge of structured literacy and its implementation. And third, aligned and engaged school communities, that is promoting active engagement among stakeholders for effective structured literacy instruction. So if we go to the next slide, here is actually a picture of the strategy found on the Read by Fourth website. And you're going to receive a link to this graphic. I think actually it's already in the chat. What I'm going to do today, which is most relevant to our session, is focus on the work related to the first column, knowledgeable and aspiring teachers, and just talk about the first couple of initiatives that are there. So we can go to the next slide. So the first initiative has been Supporting University Attainment of IDA Accreditation. And that is based upon the knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading. So just so everybody is on the same page, the knowledge and practice standards define in very great detail the knowledge and the skills that all teachers of reading should possess if they are going to be able to reach all students and help them to read proficiently. And these standards were developed by the IDA in 2010. So the partners began in 2015 by hosting a citywide conference on these standards, attracting an audience of universities and nonprofits, etc. But mostly universities, and Drexel hosted the conference. And if you're interested, there's a link to a 10-minute video of that first conference nearly 10 years ago. So continuing to get the word out, in November of 2017, PBIDA and Read by Fourth presented at the IDA National Conference about our work with university accreditation. And then there was another conference in April of 2019, hosted this time by Temple University, and it included a keynote from Emily Hanford. So these conferences were hosted by Read by Fourth, PBIDA, and the universities, and actually funded by local foundations. And note that these foundations were also funding some support for the work that universities needed to do as they pursued accreditation. And again, the theme is working together. So today, we have 11 university programs in Pennsylvania that are IDA accredited and 2 independent programs, more than any other state. And the accreditation work is continuing. There are more programs in process, which you'll hear about. And this is being led by PBIDA. And then in addition, with the advocacy work of Read by Fourth partners, the Pennsylvania Chapter 49 regs for teacher preparation programs thrillingly now incorporate the knowledge and practice standards. So the standards are sticking. So if we can go to the next slide. So another tactic pursued by this group is to increase prospective education students' awareness of structured literacy. Partners realize that applicants to teacher prep programs need to ask the right questions to make sure that the program and their investment of time and money is aligned with structured literacy. So partners develop something we like to call the consumer guide to be used by those who are applying to a program. Because again, we know that in general, applicants trust the overall reputation of a university and don't realize that they need to be discerning consumers. So here are some of the questions as an example on this guide, which by the way, there's a link in the chat. To what extent is your program informed by the IDA knowledge and practice standards? Does coursework include a closely supervised student teaching experience, working directly with students struggling to read? Does the coursework include how to use assessments to inform teaching? We hope that you will access this document and share it with any aspiring teachers you know. So the next slide, we call examining the balance. The third tactic we'd like to highlight, I think, is one of the most explicit examples of the collaborative work of Read by Fourth partners. So this is a guide for talking about literacy instruction in a way that is inclusive of the important knowledge and skills for both word recognition and for reading comprehension. The goal is to facilitate partners speaking with each other and not past each other. And the partners who collaborated on this document, who put their names on it, include Arcadia University, Drexel, St. Joe's, Temple, as well as PBIDA and the AIM Institute. And again, this is in the chat. But just in conclusion, this approach to working together, this approach to collective impact is now being led by PBIDA through a powerful statewide initiative that you're going to learn about next. And Read by Fourth couldn't be happier than to see our partners own and expand statewide this ongoing work that is required for sustainable long-term impact that goes way beyond the life of Read by Fourth. So last slide. You can learn more about our work at Read by Fourth and find all the documents and more that we highlighted today. Thank you so much for being here. And now I will turn it over to Maria Toglia of PBIDA.
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, so as Nancy said, we started to promote IDA accreditation and the knowledge and practice standards early on in the process in our collective impact work with Read by Fourth. But since PBIDA is a state organization, we were very interested in expanding our efforts across the Commonwealth. But it was very important. One of the aspects, I would say, that was most important in PBIDA's involvement with Read by Fourth was the ability to build relationships with the partners, including the funders that were involved, because there were funders who were attending meetings on a regular basis, who were interested in the activities that were happening. And in that way, we were able to build a strong relationship with a particular funder whose mission really did align with what we were trying to do to expand teacher preparation in structured literacy in Pennsylvania. And I would say that that's one of the most important aspects of building a relationship with a potential funder, is making sure that the activities that you are engaged in are specifically aligned with their mission and the goals that they have. And they saw that IDA accreditation was an important lever, an important vehicle for being able to improve, ultimately, reading outcomes with knowledgeable teachers delivering this evidence-based instruction. So with this funding, we were able to remove the financial barrier, which was critical for most of these schools that we supported, so that they could go into the pipeline and obtain accreditation without having to use very precious dollars in their department. So with this support, we were able to fund 6 educator programs to date to add to that wonderful total of 11 that we have now. So in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about how these relationships extended across the Commonwealth. So we were not only meeting with folks who were interested in Philadelphia, we were meeting with folks all over Pennsylvania, other grade level reading groups, nonprofits and literacy organizations, people from higher ed, who were all focusing on this common goal of knowledgeable and skilled teachers in structured literacy methods. And some of the folks that we were meeting with, people like Teach Plus, Children First, Excel in Education, were really teaching us and educating us about the importance of public policy, how essential it is to have decision makers creating state level policies to support schools, and including higher ed and K through 12 schools in these efforts. And so because PBIDA is a 501(c), we're limited in the amount of time that we can spend on advocacy and policy. So we created a separate entity, a separate higher education task force, myself and Christine Seppi, who is also a board member, so that we could focus our attention on advocacy and policy and begin to build relationships with legislators, and in many cases also educate legislators who don't know necessarily about literacy, about why structured literacy is so important. And those relationships really ended up being important as we pushed for legislation to go through that would support the policies that we thought were important. And the first one was led by our legislator, Senator Ortite, and he was pushing for voluntary legislation to support structured literacy implementation in schools. And I'll talk a little bit about how that ended up getting even stronger. So in the next slide, while we were creating the higher education task force, it coincided with the Department of Education here in Pennsylvania opening up Chapter 49, which is the set of regulations around teacher licensing requirements. And for the first time, they were considering adding language in the regulations that would require structured literacy teacher preparation in 5 certification areas. So K-4, 4-8, special education, reading specialists, and ELL teachers. And so we were able to mobilize all these folks that we now had relationships with during the public comment period to support these changes and to really advocate for definitions that were aligned with IDA. And we really urged the department to base the new guidelines that they would have to write on those knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading. And we did all this through the public comment period. And I can't emphasize enough how important it was to be active during that public comment period and to get folks to send in written support and written comments. And the department really took those comments seriously and in fact responded to them in writing. So we knew exactly how they were going to include or not the suggestions that we made. And so that was a very important way of influencing those decision makers. The other thing that came out of our interactions with PDE were that several of the faculty who had been meeting with us on our task force were then invited to participate in the working groups that were writing the new guidelines. And that was very important because we knew those individuals had expertise in structured literacy and that they would be wonderful in being able to help shape how those guidelines turned out. And finally, really important, we were talking to legislators about these changes, and it became apparent that it would be essential to codify these regulations into statutory law. Because in departments of education in any state, the personnel and the priorities of the folks who are working there changes with every governor that comes in. And so we wanted to make sure that these changes were enduring. And so we were able to work with legislators to make sure that these changes were codified into statutory law. And so now in Pennsylvania, all teacher education programs must comply with these new guidelines by August 1st of this year of 2024. So next slide. So this to us felt like a real opportunity to leverage these new requirements to engage even further with higher education, with higher educators. Because, you know, anyone who is in literacy understands that not everybody was in agreement or is in agreement about how kids should be taught. But we really wanted to try to be inclusive and make sure that everyone who was working in higher education had the opportunity to get some support to meet these new requirements. And so we talked with our funder again and developed a grant, a round of series of activities that we thought would be useful in supporting higher educators as they worked to meet these requirements. And so the first thing we did was we sent a group of faculty to the first national higher education summit that was planned by Stephanie Staller in Syracuse. And so we sent about 15 people to this summit with the idea that they would go and take their knowledge there, share it, but also learn, talk to their peers around the country about what was going on, with the idea that they would come back to Pennsylvania and they would help us to plan our own Pennsylvania Higher Education Summit focused on supporting faculty in a peer-to-peer collaborative learning environment. And so that happened. We had folks coming in and we created a great schedule where we could educate folks about first what the requirements were going to look like. So we had a series of table talks where folks could hear what those specific requirements were in each of the certification areas and talk to each other about them. We thought it was really important to have our presenters all from Pennsylvania, with the exception of our keynotes. We were able to get national experts, Louise Spear-Swirling and Altheria Caldera, but everyone else was from Pennsylvania because we wanted it to be faculty learning from and talking to faculty. And one of the intended and hoped for outcomes was folks wanting to be interested in continued collaborative learning together. And so we gauged interest in the, whether folks would want to participate in a statewide community of practice. And I just want to say, in terms of the grant, it's very important that you include outcomes that you hope to happen that are measurable, that can help you to continue the funding stream with activities that are aligned with the mission of the funder. So in the next slide, I'll touch briefly on this higher education community of practice before turning it over to Kathleen and Aileen, who will talk about that. So we were able to get this funding as a progression of the activities that we had laid out in our grant. And I also want to say that we were able to get grants from smaller grants from another funder in Pennsylvania, which is important because foundations really want to see that other foundations are interested and also participating in funding your activities. And so we were focused in this community specifically supporting faculty who were in the trenches, looking at their syllabi, looking at their resources, and making sure they were going to be able to comply with these requirements. We wanted it to be a safe and collegial place for folks to talk. So we had a set of norms to make sure that we were communicating in a respectful way. And we began with the assurance matrix, which is the document that everybody had to complete or will have to complete in order to demonstrate their compliance. We wanted everybody to be very clear about what was going to have to happen in their programs. And we had direct communication with the Department of Education, who was very happy to answer our questions in writing. So we had clarity from the beginning about what the requirements would be. So then our wonderful faculty facilitators could focus on the content, which was really where we wanted to go with this, and all of the topics that were related directly to structured literacy teacher preparation that you see there on the screen. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kathleen Biddle, who was one of our wonderful facilitators, who will talk about her experience with the community of practice.
Thank you, Maria. And thanks everyone for attending today's session. I'm glad that you're here. I wanted to say, I was fortunate to attend that national summit, the National Literacy Summit, and then to participate in the Pennsylvania Reading Summit. And that the work that Read by Fourth and PBIDA, the work they've done has been incredible. I recently participated on a committee to revise the reading specialist competencies for the state of Pennsylvania so that they also align with the IDA standards and practices for teachers of reading. My name is Kathleen Biddle. I'm a professor of education at Juniata College. We are a small liberal arts college in central Pennsylvania. To sort of explain a little bit about this literacy strand that is up here now, I want to say that when I joined the Department of Education at Juniata, I was surprised to find that the literacy courses were based on older models of reading instruction. Consequently, when the Department of Education decided to revise certifications, in both elementary and special education, I saw an opportunity at my level to revise our curriculum to reflect more current research-based methods of reading instruction. And I really welcomed the opportunity to update our course offerings. And in doing so, I created 2 new courses and 3 field experiences for teachers in our program. And so this chart shows where we were as a department when the state announced the changes to Chapter 49 and mandated competencies in structured literacy. And it may look from this chart as though we have our act all together, but I want to say that I would characterize the development of this literacy strand as a long and winding road, during which ideas were met with opposition by fellow faculty members and indeed even sometimes students who didn't see the need for what I was proposing. And so the first course that I developed, our students take in their sophomore year. Our pre-service teachers take Language and the Developing Brain, which covers birth to grade 2. They have with that concurrently a lab where they are in a kindergarten first or second grade placement. And so at the outset of this course, I really impress on students that as teachers, preparing teachers, they are brain architects, that they are changing the neural structures of their students. And I want to say that initially, students balked at having to learn the phonemes of English and what is a digraph and how do we count phonemes. And suddenly it became evident to me that the majority of the students I was preparing to become teachers had come up through, they are the children of balanced literacy, who never learned these English structures themselves. The good news is that once they went out into the field and began working with children, they were surprised and delighted to be able to participate in classroom lessons on things like counting phonemes and identifying a digraph. And then as juniors, everyone, both special education and pre-K4, everyone takes language and literacy, which had already been in place when I arrived, and it has been revised to have a structured literacy basis. But the students learn about typical Lang and Lit development, and we added a field experience to that. So they are in inclusive classrooms working with small groups of children. And then by senior year, everyone takes the reading difficulties class, and it is structured literacy for struggling readers. And we have an on-campus reading clinic that is open to children from all around our area, any child at our local school districts, and even our charter school and our Christian academy. They are able to come to us after school twice a week, and the seniors work one-on-one with a struggling reader. They complete assessments, they implement structured literacy lessons, and then in the final project for the clinic and the course is a detailed case report where they explain the results of formal and informal assessments, the intervention program that they used, and other information about behavior and motivation and other aspects, as we know, that come hand in hand with reading difficulties for some children. So when Maria introduced the idea of communities of practice, I really was excited about that, because though this looks as though it's all in place and perfect, the reality is it's a continuous work in progress as we navigate not just the PDE competencies, but also placements for our pre-service teachers in school districts that may or may not yet have fully implemented the structured literacy approach to English language arts. So I was excited to be able to participate in the higher education communities of practice, where each month faculty from universities and colleges across the state join together to exchange ideas and share resources related to these new PDE competencies as we all realigned our curricula to meet the competencies that we were given. However, given that we represented a very diverse group of individuals who we were at various stages of learning about structured literacy practices. We decided that there was a need for guidelines or norms, and Maria mentioned this. And so those norms that we instituted for the communities of practice included that structured literacy is necessary, but not sufficient for proficient reading, that we would value everyone's knowledge and experience and the diversity of experiences that people had, that we might disagree and sometimes did disagree, but that our discourse would be respectful and kind, and we would always assume best intentions from the participants in our group. And basically, we created a safe space for people to ask questions and share knowledge and experiences and discuss challenges, but with a focus on building solutions. And I think that really created for me, and I think for everyone who was participating, a safe space for collaboration and also for the open exchange of ideas and opinions. So as we progress to the next slide, I'm going to be showing you some examples of things that my colleague Lisa Cruzy from Tuscarora Intermediate Unit 11 and I did. We actually we did 2 of the programs, one on the vocabulary competencies for structured literacy, and the other one we did on fluency. So I thought I would just pull some things from the fluency community of practice to give you an idea of how we were supporting our colleagues in higher education. So we began each COP with a review of the competencies that we needed to meet in an area. And we followed that with a brief sort of research background on why these areas were important. And then we continued by demonstrating in-class activities and field experience assignments that we were using to meet those competencies in vocabulary in each of our literacy courses. And so these are just some examples that we gave other faculty members to perhaps add to their curricular offerings. So in Class for Language and the Developing Brain, I introduced the simple view of reading, and there's a wonderful Reading Rockets video on the simple view of reading. We did things like introduce the 4 types of vocabulary, and then in their field experiences, the sophomores would reflect on the various types of vocabulary that were being used in the classroom. We generated in-class word webs to illustrate semantic neighborhoods. And so the reason that we did that was to emphasize that the more you know about a word, the more connections you have about a word, the faster you will read and retrieve that word. And we talked a lot about semantic depth and breadth when working with children on vocabulary. And then our students are able to do word webs with the students in their field placements, which allows them to apply the knowledge that they're learning in the course. And I want to say that was a lot of how I prefer to teach is to, I'll give you some theory, but then I'm going to tell you, here's how you apply it. But then the best part is when you actually apply it. And I certainly see that in Language in the Brain. Those students just come back from the field placement saying, oh my gosh, and then she said this, and then he said this. And so it's really wonderful to see them apply and experiment with these various applied activities as they prepare to enter classrooms of their own someday. We also did do a lexical depth activity. How well do you know this word? Like, I've heard it before, I know it, and I can give you a definition. I can use it in a sentence. And we do that in class. And it's a lot of fun to see where everyone is with different words. And it's very illustrative to the pre-service teachers that though here we are, we're all sophomores, we're all pre-service teachers, we're all taking this course, and guess what? We all don't have the same levels of knowledge of the words that we're talking about here in class. Ergo, when you have your second grade class and they're all second graders and they're all 7 years old, more or less, there can't be an assumption that every child enters your room with the same level of lexical knowledge that you may have assumed without understanding this phenomenon yourself. And so then they are able to complete those activities in their placements. We also talk about dialogic reading, and my colleague Aileen has wonderful examples of dialogic reading guidelines that make it align beautifully with structured literacy. And my students are then able to do that, practice that with children in their placement. I begin to introduce simple morphemes like ing, ed, and s. We would go more into depth in later courses. And then also I have them note in their placements examples of direct and indirect vocabulary instruction, because we understand that both types of instruction need to be happening in the classroom. So that is the sophomore year, and I would say that's sort of like the introduction, right, to structured literacy and the beginning. I also really emphasize, and it's not on the chart, the importance of oral language and the link between oral language and reading ability. And they do collect personal narratives from the children and then compare those oral narratives with reading acquisition and can really see quite clearly the link between children's oral narration skills and their ability to access print and comprehend. So on the next slide, this is the junior course, and it is language and literacy. Again, as I said, we had to shift it. It had been a balanced literacy course. We had to shift it to structured literacy. And in this class, these are just some examples of what we do, certainly not exhaustive. We do more than this. But we do talk about Isabel Beck and her colleagues and tiered words, the tiers of vocabulary instruction. So we talk about how to choose vocabulary words to teach. And the juniors also choose a children's book and they work in dyads to identify the tier 2 words that would be useful for instruction and create student-friendly definitions. And a shout out to Patton, because Patton has a fabulous vocabulary. Well, they have fabulous literacy snippets all over the place. But they also have a Patton vocabulary video that is a really excellent example of explicit structured vocabulary instruction. And included there on the Patton website is a sample lesson plan completed, and then a template of that lesson plan that any teacher could follow very easily, that makes it very fun and relatively simple to implement that plan once you understand. And so I found Patton has a wonderful source. Dr. Pam Kastner has really built such a library of resources. I recommend everyone go there for ideas for teaching and for wonderful videos. We also do extended instruction on morphology, and the students do reflections on the use of morphology. Thank you, Karen. And then they also watch a Reading Rockets video. Reading Rockets has a wonderful array of resources. And there's a wonderful example there of teaching semantic gradients in a primary classroom. And we watch that in class, and then the juniors complete that activity with a small group of children in their placement. And then, let's see here. Yes, in the senior year, we have reading difficulties and the reading clinic. And again, these are just some examples of activities. We once again have choose a children's book and identify tier 2 words. We review guidelines for dialogic reading. We practice semantic feature analysis and review word mapping. Again, this is not exhaustive, but these are things that meet the vocabulary competencies for chapter 49. And then in the field experience, which is the actual hands-on clinic that I and my colleague Lisa Cruzy supervise, they implement vocabulary lesson plans. There's oral reading every single session with the child. They implement semantic feature analysis and word mapping, and there is direct explicit vocabulary instruction as part of the course. So I think one of the beauties of our literacy strand that I was sharing in the communities of practice is that there is application at every level. So the students are exposed to theory, exposed to how-tos and guides, but they actually are able to implement them. And for these communities of practice, I know myself, Lisa and I provided links to everything that we use, as well as links. I actually put up slides that I use in my class and suggested to my higher ed colleagues, like, don't reinvent the wheel. Take this, use what I have here. I don't mind if it's replicated. And I think that also goes along with the theme of Read by Fourth and PBIDA, that we don't want to hold on to what we know and what we do, as a proprietary item, but rather to have everyone doing all these great things together is really just going to enhance the outcomes for our children. And then, let me see here. Oh, yes, so we provided all the links to all of that. And then my final slide is just, we also shared textbooks in addition to links to resources. So these are the textbooks that we are using at Juniata College. So the language development text, though it's 2011, they haven't updated it, but the thing I like about this course is that there is an entire chapter on African American English in the classroom, and there's an entire chapter on oral narration by children from a variety of cultures that helps teachers understand that the oral narrative of one culture may vary greatly from what we value in Western culture, and may be different, but not necessarily delayed or deficient. And then obviously Speech to Print by Louisa Moats. The students read those chapters. We do the workbook exercises. Fundamentals of Literacy Instruction is another excellent structured literacy textbook with great activities in every chapter for students to apply the knowledge. And then Louise Spears Sperling, the Structured Literacy Interventions, has been an outstanding book for me to use in the reading difficulties class. And obviously Bringing Words to Life is another terrific resource that we were able to use. But I think mostly what I want to emphasize is how wonderful it was. I mean, I'm showing snippets of what we did in the vocabulary community of practice. But I think the great thing that came from that is, for example, like I asked Aileen to mail me her dialogic reading ideas, her templates, so that I could use them in my language in the brain class. And I felt similarly about the rest of the community of practice meetings, that I really learned a lot and was able to identify resources that we could use and pull in to improve our literacy strand at Juniata College. And that was really gratifying. So the communities of practice have been a marvelous idea for those of us in higher education. So thank you very much. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Aileen.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. I'm Aileen Hauer, and I am wearing a few hats here, and I'm very grateful to be with you this afternoon and to be presenting with such an incredible panel of speakers and educators and advocates. So first, I am a literacy instructor, associate professor at Millersville University of Pennsylvania. And I am also on the board of PBIDA, which is fairly recent, thanks to all of this work and these initiatives, and Maria, honestly. And then I have also been affiliated with the Keystone State Literacy Association, which used to be called Keystone State Reading Association, KSRA. It is now KSLA, and we are the Pennsylvania level of the International Literacy Association. And so that's where we're going to start here, because Maria had reached out to KSLA. She had shared in her part of this session that it was really important that we were, it didn't matter which group you belonged to, right? Teachers are teachers, and teachers who teach in Pennsylvania were who we wanted to get into to this, well, the Higher Ed Summit was also the teachers of the teachers and everyone across Pennsylvania. But KSLA partnered with PBIDA for this summit. And I had the opportunity, this is actually a picture and I'm in the picture, which I was like, wow, that's impressive for me to use as one of my slides. And I facilitated the conversation with reading specialists discussing the Chapter 49 structured literacy competencies. The wonderful things that came out of the summit were that we were providing a support to in-service teachers to make those shifts because we had groups for each of the 5 grade level bands, and people who were Maria brought on to facilitate those conversations where people could say, and there was someone sitting at my table who was still stuck and really needed to come together with other educators across the state to say, you know, this isn't, we're not throwing anything out. We're not telling anybody that they're doing anything bad. It's really, you know, bred from a know better, do better. And that we need to, you know, to really create these comprehensive literacy programs for students, we need to embrace those foundational literacy skills and having those really heartfelt conversations. It was a great opportunity for collaboration. A lot of people sharing contact. Oh, I didn't realize we're in the same neighborhood. It's, you know, we all get into this work with students or with, you know, in higher ed with our undergraduate and graduate students. And we forget that down the street, there might be colleagues who are doing this very same work with other teachers that work alongside the teachers we're sending out or that we are preparing. But it was important for KSLA to be in the room and show support for PDE, for PBIDA, for IDA, for all of these initiatives, because we wanted to make sure that we had a unified message. We're not trying to confuse teachers, and I think that's what I think that's the work of all of these organizations has really been trying to steer away from, is just, you can't, like, I mean, I, as of 6 months ago, was still talking to people in certain parts of the state that were like, yeah, you know, you keep mentioning structured literacy, Chapter 49, not hearing any of that from our administrators. Whereas if you're in other areas, for example, you know, the Lancaster area, Harrisburg area where Patton is, and IU 15, IU 13, you know, they've already been hearing it almost like pre-pandemic. And so we just wanted to make sure that we were really consistent in supporting teachers, shifting and making sure that they were not just aware of the Chapter 49 structured literacy competencies, but they were able to put things into place, confidently talk. I know at KSLA, we came back and had our leadership conference around the structured literacy and actually followed a similar format where we offered our attendees breakout sessions so that they could have these conversations. And this was all modeled after all of the work of PBIDA and Maria and everybody else. And so that was a wonderful thing to be a part of, both to assure myself that we were moving in the right direction in my educational spaces and with the teachers I work with, but also as another agency who does teacher preparation. I wanted to, kind of spotlight a few different things. Kathleen did such an incredible job of talking about the community of practice. We had started our work the January before the summit. And I felt personally like, we had the matrices and we aligned it with all of the courses in each of our 5 programs. And I was asking colleagues to look through the competencies and to, rate on the matrices where our courses were, which I know Kathleen had talked about doing similar work at her institution. And I initially felt that I was this noisy gong in this like silo of, you seem to be really into this, but we really don't know why. And so being a part of this higher ed community of practice for me and the work that I'm doing, and I'm a graduate coordinator for both our ESL and our reading specialist master's programs. It just was like, whew, I'm not making it up. This isn't something that I misread or misunderstood, and this work does need to be done. So it really empowered and sort of assured me that, fight the good fight, make sure that we are shifting and aligning our programs in the way that needed to be done, so that when we do the assurance with PDE, it's not we're trying to catch up or make up stuff. We've legitimately and authentically done this work. So just trying to think of some of the other things that I had wanted to share here. We eventually were able to get the support of the dean because I have a colleague who wrote or was on the team to write the educator ethics competencies chapter 49, and then another colleague who is very passionate about the culturally responsive sustaining education competencies. So it was nice, all 3 of us kind of went in together and, with PDE sharing with the dean, hey, you're gonna have to, assure us that you've met all these requirements on structured literacy. I took lead on that, and we were able to eventually, this past year, we rewrote all of our course objectives, including in the children's literature course and the ESL courses, and comprehensively, we were able to update everything. But I feel like without the community of practice, I wouldn't have had ideas to share with my colleagues for where to get started, where to go. Additionally, I was able to present on phonemic awareness and phonics with my department chair. There's 2 of us here that teach literacy. And that was able to further encourage our department and colleagues to see the importance of the work. And like has already been shared, our goals for these sessions were to just share what how we've been shifting and updating, whether it's the reading materials such as Kathleen had shared, but also activities, but to be, again, as Kathleen has shared, to be a sounding board for folks like, hey, this is what we're doing. Oh, That sounds like a really great resource or activity or assignment. And to really be able to get new ideas, but grow resources and our practice, but also to get confirmation for the things that we've already done. I know for me, one of the awesome ideas that I took away from our session was that I've actually used this in our post-baccalaureate. It's a methods of teaching literacy PK-4 class, as well as our middle level, which is a literacy course, which since they're content area specific, they don't always understand why they need to learn about like high frequency words or phonological awareness, but we make them anyway. But they actually administered the past David Kilpatrick's past assignment to just anyone in their life, because we don't always have them in a field placement simultaneously for them to be able to work with a student in kindergarten or first grade or even preschool. And the person who was in our group had shared, she just has them, their dad, their grandpa, their boyfriend. Unfortunately, a lot of our students are female, and they did the past with those folks, and they're like, but they're readers. I thought that would be such an easy test for them to pass, and realize just how complex that and comprehensive that assessment is. And so that's one thing that my students have had a lot of ahas about, and I wouldn't have gotten that idea to put into my my teaching without this community of practice. So where are we, Millersville University specifically, in our journey? I don't know that I was maybe an early adopter, but I felt like I was maybe dragging the rest of the department and the college along behind me again, like, but she seems so invested in this. I guess there's something to this. But now with the work between Patton and PBIDA, we've really been able to guide and shape our path, being informed. And so now we can share with certainty, and I will share that not only are local school districts calling us to ask if we are structured literacy aligned. I've even had a school district that contacted us in a very different part of the state, not our geographic area, saying that things they were hearing from their university were not, seeming to be structured literacy aligned. And there was a connection with one of our gifted faculty members and this administrator, and but they're asking, they want to make sure, and we are now confidently able to say that we have 100% embedded structured literacy in the Chapter 49 competencies into each of our classes, and even components into non-literacy specific courses, especially for vocabulary, background knowledge in our content area classes. And we've even had parents who have come to our open houses and asked, what will my student learn here about dyslexia? And in front of like 75 other parents. And so again, the fact that we've, through Patton and PBIDA and PDE and KSLA, we've been able to shift those readings, assignments, and our teaching to become in alignment earlier and not later has really just improved our ability to serve our stakeholders. And even in our faculty search, we have a faculty search that we have done and that we will be redoing in the fall, in case anyone's out there and wants a position, tenure track literacy position. That was also a question that came up from our candidates for our position. And so to see it so heavily infused throughout Pennsylvania, and to know that we're doing the right work has been just such a relief and also a boon to our, to our maintaining our reputation as a premier instructional, university. And so, hold on, sorry, I think I skipped something. That was our presentation. I'm so sorry, I forgot to move it forward. And so then our decision as a program and as a department has been that we will be seeking one of the very generous to be able to be one of the universities that was able to get financial support for applying for an IDA accreditation. And we believe that we're going to start with our reading specialist program. And we believe that this is something that our future reading specialists, and even our past reading specialists, among those that I'm talking to, starting the program and just those who are alum, is highly prized and something that oh, really? Wow, that's fantastic. Oh, I'm so excited that you're going to be going for the IDA accredited program badge. And our department chair is participating in Orton Gillingham training at the Children's Dyslexia Center in Lancaster. And so we are very, very excited to do this work. We'll be taking this on in the fall. And we earnestly believe that this will really allow our program completers to have a really strong sense of confidence. I'm just starting my 30th year in education. And all of it has been in ELA or in, reading specifically. I can't tell you how many teachers that I've heard across my career that have said, oh, I don't know how to approach a student with dyslexia. I wouldn't even know where to get started. I don't know how to teach structured literacy, phonics, those sorts of things, even though they have a reading specialist certification. And so we really feel that in addition to a profound distinction for our reading program, that this accreditation will provide teachers with that confidence in their practice. And when they speak with parents and administrators about dyslexia and other language-based learning challenges that their students face. And that's the best thing, right? Confident teachers who can make confident, curricular and teaching, instructional decisions for the students that are in front of them it's the absolute most important thing. We are certain that the accreditation will provide us with insights and feedback as well about how to strengthen our program, which the community of practice did to a certain extent, but to really have an external accrediting body come in and provide us with specific feedback. I'm very much an advocate of iron sharpens iron, and we definitely believe that that will be value added to our program and to our students who are enrolled in and complete our programs. And ultimately what they, them learning the essential components of how to help students become, lifelong readers and writers. We know that this will be supported by this accreditation. So thank you.